Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for our New England Dairy event, Behind the Scenes with Jasper Hill Farm, a live virtual tour and cheese tasting. I'm Hillary Wallentup, registered dietitian and nutrition specialist with New England Dairy, and I'll be your moderator tonight. And just want to tell you a little bit about New England Dairy. Some of you might be familiar with us, some of you might not. New England Dairy is a nonprofit education organization staffed by registered dietitians and other professionals that serves as the voice of our local dairy farmers. For 100 years, we've worked in New England to celebrate all things dairy, farming, food, nutrition, and wellness. And now we have a short video to show you a little bit more about what we do and who we represent.
This is a New England dairy farm. This is a New England dairy farmer. And this is what New England dairy farmers do. They get up every day, rain or shine, and they get to work, caring for their herd, being stewards of the land, and making real dairy products. Products that end up in New England grocery stores and local schools. Some of these farms and families have been doing this for 100 years. Some more, some less. They do it because it's what they're good at. It's what they love. It's a real passion. With real benefits beyond the farm. We are New England Dairy, champions of real farmers across New England and Eastern New York. Providers of essential information to health professionals, educators, and consumers. Fuelers of healthy students with in-school nutrition and wellness initiatives. We connect communities with their local dairy farmers. We help schools serve healthy dairy options that kids love. And we provide opportunities for students to become leaders of positive change. Our team of registered dietitians and community program organizers is dedicated to promoting all the good that dairy can do. Strengthening our communities, supporting our farmers, bringing real people together, and sharing some real wholesome dairy. New England Dairy. Real farms, real food, real local.
But before we really get into the tour and the cheese tasting, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. You folks are muted. However, if you have questions throughout the event, please use the Q&A box, type them in. There'll be opportunities for questions with Zoe and Mateo throughout the evening, so don't wait until the very end to ask your burning cheese questions. And my colleague Heidi will also be behind the scenes as well to answer questions. And some of you, so many of you asked amazing questions in your registration, so we'll also be incorporating those throughout the night. So thank you so much for those awesome questions. And after the event, keep an eye on your email for our event evaluation. Your feedback helps us plan awesome events like this. And another reason to check your email, winners of the Jasper Hill curated cheese collections will be notified next week. And we invite you to stay connected and follow New England Dairy and Jasper Hill Farm. And so one of the amazing parts about tonight is that we get to eat cheese, eat Jasper Hill Farm cheese with the folks of Jasper Hill. So tonight we'll be tasting and learning about Harbison, Bailey Hazen Blue, Cabot Cloth Bond Cheddar, Willoughby, and Whitney. And I have my cheese right in front of me. Let's see if I can, all ready to go. And I know many of you also purchased the New England Dairy Collection or bought different cheeses on your own. So we want to see your cheese. In the Zoom reminder emails, we did include a link to upload your photos. But if you haven't yet, not too late. So use this QR code, just, hold up your phone camera to the QR code and the link should pop right up. And we'll actually be bringing the gallery up later in the event and checking out your cheese with Jasper Hill. So make sure to get them uploaded. And now I'm thrilled to introduce our host from Jasper Hill Farm. Mateo Keeler is the head cheesemaker at Jasper Hill Farm and is the founder with his brother Andy of the Cellars at Jasper Hill. Founded in 2003, Jasper Hill is a social enterprise focused on economic and agricultural development and the conservation of agricultural soils and the working Vermont landscape, all through the production of high-value artisan cheese. The cellars at Jasper Hill is a centralized facility that was created to lower the barriers to entry for artisan cheese producers by providing ripening, marketing, and distribution services with the intent of allowing farmstead and artisan cheesemakers to scale. And Zoe Brickley is the director of marketing at Jasper Hill. She began exploring the world of cheese while attending the French Culinary Institute in New York City. From there, she took on the role of cave manager and American buyer at Maurice Cheese. In 2009, Zoe joined the team at Jasper Hill Farm, where she led foundational sales and marketing efforts for the growing company. Zoe loves to learn more about cheese through teaching, having presented hundreds of hours of content for many organizations like our own. She is an American Cheese Society certified cheese professional and sensory evaluator, a member of the, and please excuse my French, Guild International des Fromages, and chair of the marketing committee for the Vermont Cheese Council. And now I'm so excited to turn it over to Zoe to tell us a little bit about Jasper Hill.
Hey everyone, welcome to the cellars at Jasper Hill. So we're underground in the back pasture of the creamery where all of the magic happened in 2003 when we made our first batch of cheese. Back then it was Andy and Mateo and Angie and Victoria, their wives, and they were doing soup to nuts farmstead cheese productions. So milking the cows, making the cheese every day. They never had, milk picked up, and then ripening it in the cellar of their original creamery space. We've grown a little bit since then, and so I'll tell you a little bit more about how we found ourselves with this massive cheese bunker a few years later. But before then, we get to see Mateo tell you a little bit more about his vision and our purpose in his own words.
Hi, everybody. I'm so pleased to be here with you all today. Thank you for tuning in. Look forward to sharing and answering some questions in a few minutes. But I thought I'd just start out by bringing you along the history of our journey. And it began really as a quest to satisfy three intrinsic needs. In our mid-20s, Andy and I really distilled it down to like three things: meaningful work in a place that we love with people that we love. And Greensboro is a happy place of our collective family childhood. Our family's been summering on Caspian Lake here for 100 years, coming up on 100 years. We have 2 summers to go. But this is a landscape whose pastoral beauty is defined by the footprint of the farmer. And as Zoe mentioned, Northern Vermont is a challenging place to milk cows. It's been a marginal economy since there was an economy here, really. Nonetheless, as far as I'm concerned, it is the most beautiful place in the world. Cheese for us is really just a lever that we're yanking on in order to create a livable community, make and model great environmental stewardship, land stewardship, animal husbandry, and redefine what it means to milk cows in the 21st century in Northern Vermont. For generations now, there has been this transfer of wealth from rural communities to urban and suburban centers through pricing mechanisms, and that's all driven by food policy. What we're really doing is plugging into markets where there's plenty of disposable income, building a pipeline to those markets, putting high value products into those pipelines, and extracting capital back into our community in such a way as to create sustainable school systems and enable us to, live and have social culture and economy here. We have a lot of noise going on. We're still a little under construction. Not sure if you can hear that in the background. What we're looking at here is the original creamery. My brother Andy and I built it in 2003, and we ripened our cheese in the cellar beneath the production space here. This past year, we really kind of developed, you know, a new concept that's going to enable us to grow over the next, you know, 10 years of the business. We built about 8,500 square foot addition and installed some reconditioned copper cheese vats that are straight out of the French Alps, which we're using to make raw milk Alpine style cheeses in basically a new, quite efficient manner that is going to enable us really to bring in up to 10 farms, the milk from 10 neighbors essentially, moving forward here. So basically the way this works is you'll see there's no drain here. We bring fresh raw milk into the building. Milk is generally less than 24 hours old. We can collect milk 7 days a week from our grass and hay fed herd. We make these cheeses with natural starters, and that we produce in these automated computerized incubators. When the curd's ready to mold, we're able to essentially hit a button here on the screen that turns on a vacuum pump, and we vacuum the curd out of the vats and down into a vacuum molding system, which we can see down below. So this morning we made alpha Tolman. You can see it in the presses, but essentially the way this works is the curds and the whey end up in the vacuum bells, and the curd settles down into forms that are pressed up against the bottom of a gasketed connection underneath the bells. After which point, press for a minute and then cut into smaller blocks, which are placed in molds, and then press for 4 or 5 hours until the acidity comes into range.
Mateo, oh, sorry. I'm going to quickly ask a question for those who might not be very familiar with cheese making. What is a starter? You know, taking a couple steps back, what's a starter? Is that Rennet? We had some questions come in about that.
Absolutely. So starter is generally a mix of lactic acid bacteria. And what the lactic acid bacteria is essentially doing is metabolizing the lactose in the milk or in the curd and producing lactic acid. And that fermentation is essential to the production of safe cheese. Mm-hmm. Essentially, what we're doing is we're fermenting the sugar in the milk and creating an environment that creates a selective pressure, so to speak, which makes the growth of undesirable organisms, spoilage organisms, and pathogens much more complicated. That's essentially what cheese making is all about. It's, you know, aggregating the protein, the fat, and preserving it for consumption, and that's been going on for about 10,000 years now. What we're doing is really using traditional practices that go way back to the essentially the dawn of like human civilization, Western civilization, using some of the same techniques that are primordial in essence, and plugging them into like a modern dairy production system. Rennet is coagulant. It's how we essentially capture the protein, aggregate the protein, and it's an enzyme called chymosin that clips the kappa casein between the 105th and 106th amino acid in that chain. And when that happens, it basically loses the hydrogen ion, which reverses the polarity, attracts a calcium molecule, and the polarity of the proteins is changed so that instead of repelling, because they're negatively charged the way they are in like milk, they attract one to another and create a matrix, and that matrix is called a curd, right? And so ultimately what we're doing is mimicking the way that a calf would digest milk, and that enzyme chymosin exists in the abomasum, the fourth stomach of an unweaned calf, right? So these are, essentially four ingredients. We have milk, we've got salt, we've got starter cultures, and we've got rennet. And those four ingredients, you can make 1,000 different products. So
one more question, or multiple questions coming in, but so there's been a lot of questions about flavor. Like, so where does that flavor come in?
Flavor is really driven by the enzymatic potential of the milk and the curd. So it's driven really by the microbial diversity, right? So the more diversity of microbes that you have in your milk or in your cheese, the more flavor potential there is, because like chymosin, enzymes work only in very specific locations. It's the microbial diversity in that ecology that really drives flavor production, because each of these enzymes works only in very specific locations on a protein, and flavor production there's a linear correlation between microbial diversity and complexity of flavor, which is why raw milk cheeses have so much more flavor potential, and they can be safe as long as the milk and the farming system is capable of producing diversity without pathogens, right? And I know there's some questions about raw milk specifically, and cheese and raw milk cheese. And just to be clear, we're not big advocates for like the wholesale sale of raw milk in and of itself, right? But we have these technological hurdles in the cheese making process that make raw milk cheese intrinsically safe. And if you think about some of the great cheeses in the world, Roquefort, Parmigiano Reggiano, Gruyere, Bailey Hazen Blue, Alpha Tolman, they're made from raw milk, and they have been forever, and they're linked to the production of milk with very specific farming practices.
So just to, continue on, Matteo, talking about raw milk, talk about pasteurization. Pasteurization is a simple heating and cooling process, and this is for the sake of public health and food safety. So, from a health standpoint, it does not significantly impact nutrient content, and it comes with all the same benefits and none of the risk as raw unpasteurized milk. However, if you want to purchase raw milk cheese in the United States, it must have been aged for a minimum of 60 days. So whether that's produced domestically, like Jasper Hill cheese, or imported in from another country. And this 60-day rule was designed to allow the acids in the salt in the cheese enough time to destroy harmful bacteria. So cheesemakers like Matteo, like so in the United States, have worked with FDA and adhere to many strict food safety protocols. So now we have, questions are coming in fast and furious, but, I want to quick, ask you, Zoe, we just saw this beautiful creamery expansion. What does this mean for the future of Jasper Hill?
I think it really means that we can broaden our impact. Matteo was masking his excitement, I think, a little bit. This was a major milestone for Jasper Hill, and it's his dream creamery. I think he never expected when they built it originally in 2003 that we would be able to scale it to where we are now. It's still relatively small on the grand scheme of things. I'm standing in front of an entire batch of cheese here. just, right around 500 pounds. 2 carts is what we make in a day from our soft cheese equipment, maybe a little bit more on the hard cheese size, but it's allowing us to make cheese in a way that's much easier on our staff. And it means that we're going to be able to be more inclusive of different kinds of people to help us make cheese. So previously in our old creamery, we were really limited to large, strapping, strong people who could lift and reach and really physically engage in a way that not everybody can. And so now we're going to be able to include more different kinds of people who are able to operate the equipment and contribute their expertise, even if they can't lift 70 pounds over their head. So in this new creamery space, we'll be able to process more milk. We'll be able to make multiple batches of cheese a day. So right now we only make raw milk cheese from our own cows, but we're already making cheese from 3 small neighboring farms nearby. And we hope to expand that to 10, as Matteo alluded to, in the next 5 to 10 years.
Very cool. So we have a lot of questions coming in about, about the creamery, about cheese making. I also see you holding some harbison there. I want to get in at least one question, and then we're all going to start eating some cheese, which is very exciting. So Stacy wanted to know, are you constantly creating new starters, or do you have your starters and keep them going like a sourdough? I know we saw the sourdough craze in the pandemic. So can you talk a little bit about your starters and, about experimenting, to create new cheeses?
Absolutely. So with a pasteurized cheese like this, we have to sell it younger than 60 days because it's quite soft and young. Softer cheeses move a lot faster. And in a pasteurized cheese, the flavor profile is very deliberate. So we're using a culture blend that we've purchased, and that's been developed to help make these cheeses as flavorful as possible. So even though it's pasteurized, doesn't mean it's bland. We have created those flavors with those commercial cultures. When we're talking about a raw milk cheese, that's where we get more into sourdough territory, where we're harvesting our native microflora in order to drive the character of those cheeses. So you can make very flavorful cheeses, either raw or pasteurized, but the raw milk kind, you're using fewer purchased or commercial cultures. And in fact, Matteo sort of quickly glazed over the fact that we're now able to really make our own starters and the coagulants using the new equipment that we have there. So we're really unhitching ourselves from purchased cultures for our raw milk alpine style cheeses like Alpha Tolman, Whitney, which we'll try, and Highlander.
Awesome. So someone did ask Laura, will the cheese tasting be guided? And yes, we are so lucky. We have an expert here. Let's eat some cheese. So I'm going to hand it over to you. You are the expert here, Zoe.
Okay, so I'm standing in our bloomy rind vault, and I have a bloomy rind cheese called harbison. So the first question that we get asked usually is this a brie? That's like asking if that copy machine in your office is a Xerox. Brie is just the most popular bloomy rind cheese that we all know about. So we tend to talk about bries, the brie family. Bloomy rinds is just a little bit more of a general term, and we call it a bloomy rind because the rind literally blooms. So we can show you here a younger cheese where the rind isn't quite as established as the one that I'm holding. Kind of got its peach fuzz phase, but you can see it's blooming and puffing up. So that's a flora that we've specifically added to this cheese, and we've created the right pH and moisture content for it to flourish. And then we've put it into this cave, which is perfectly set to the temperature and humidity, specifically the humidity and the amount of airflow and renewal that we need to make this flora thrive. It's actually a cousin of a white button mushroom you can think of. We're sort of growing a field of little tiny white mushrooms on the surface of the cheese. And that's not only beautiful and protective for the cheese, it also softens it. So when these cheeses are first made, they're very rubbery and firm. And as the rind grows, it's breaking down the fats and proteins, sort of releasing the water that is trapped in a young rubbery curd, and turning those fat and protein molecules that are being metabolized by the microflora into flavor. Basically, the fat and the protein get broken up so small they can get into your nose. That's why fresh cheese is quite bland and aged cheese is very aromatic. So harbison, let's try it. I get carried away. So that's the family that we're in. This particular cheese is wrapped with spruce bark, harvested from the inner bark layer of a spruce tree nearby. This is the cambium layer, and that's helping the cheese stand up straight and giving it really interesting flavor. So if you haven't already, the best way into this cheese is to, I sort of got this going here. I might need a knife to fully peel that back. One moment. So here we go. This is my approach to opening a harbison. If you've already cut it, then you know, it's still going to taste delicious inside. You might just have a harder time keeping it in place on the board. But if you kind of peel back the rind, fillet it a little bit, then you can scoop out the inside with crusty bread or a spreader. And this gooey texture I'm talking about is just the hard work of a lot of microbes. So this cheese, when it's ripe, sometimes we get calls from customers who've never had it before, and they're a little nervous about how aromatic their boxes are. I'm not sure if any of you experienced that, but the stinkier, the better. And usually the bark is worse than the bite. It's quite aromatic. And then when you take a bite, it's very balanced. It kind of tastes like roasted vegetables, roasted garlic, maybe a little that mushroomy flavor from the mushroom family doing that work of ripening. So it should be very robust and flavorful, especially for a young cheese. We put a lot of thought and work into the culture blend that develops these textures and flavors.
So could you eat the rind though?
Yes, I like to say rind your own business. So if you like the taste of if you like the taste of the rind, go right ahead. If you choose to leave it aside, nobody's judging you. When we make the cheeses, a soft cheese, we actually use the rind as part of our evaluation for how successful it was, because there's more intent behind enjoying the rind. Whereas a harder cheese, we wouldn't mark a cheese down if the rind wasn't tasty. So usually the softer the cheese, the more palatable the rind is, but it's always personal preference.
Awesome. So how do you recommend folks just take a spoonful or, you know, pair it with something? How do you recommend they enjoy harbison or just any of your cheeses?
I'm a purist, and so we always, especially when we're evaluating quality, we always try the cheese just all by itself. Maybe clean our palates with a, you know, a little bit of seltzer water or something, or a neutral cracker in between if we have a really strong one that kind of can help with the reset. But if you're enjoying it at home, you know, take a bite first. Don't be afraid of having a little spoonful of cheese, and then however you like to enjoy it is great. Sometimes I like especially crusty bread with these cheeses because it can be a little less salty than crackers. These cheeses are fully seasoned that way. Their salt is a big part of making sure these cheeses ripen on track. So yeah, or a low sodium cracker. You know, even if you're not watching salt in your diet, I like to keep those around just because they're a nice sort of complement. And then dried fruit and nuts is a really nice way to kind of round out the board. You can make a whole meal of that.
Awesome. Many nights I have. You know, so that room, I mean, I know we're going to be visiting different caves throughout the evening. Can you give us a little, like, what's it smell like? What's the temperature? Can you just tell the environment of that cave?
Yeah, so I mean, it's in the low 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So it kind of feels and smells like a fall day, especially because so many of these cheeses are wrapped in freshly harvested spruce bark. And so it has a sprucey, woodsy aroma. And then it has that sort of, you know, mushroomy, earthy quality to it. But the air exchange system that we're looking at here, it's a pretty sophisticated piece of equipment. These cheeses really like fresh air. And then we have a sock hanging from the ceiling, we call it, and that helps slow down the air and filter it. I've turned it off just so we can hear each other okay. But there's a lot of fresh air in this cave. These bloomy rind cheeses like that fresh air. So compared to the other vaults, it's relatively fresh smelling and very woodsy and nice, and slightly cool and quite damp. We're in the high 90% humidity here.
Very cool. So one more question, and then we're going to talk about, you know, farming, which is a big part of Jasper Hill Farm. Stephen from Vermont wants to know, why use a cave? Why are you underground?
All right. So first of all, we're below the frost line here in northern Vermont. We're in a subarctic climate zone. And the cave that we've built here is mimicking a root cellar in the Loire Valley of France before refrigeration technology. So before people could put their cheese in a refrigerator to keep it for months or years, they were putting it in a root cellar, a cellar underneath their home, probably. So that's where humans discovered these flora that have a positive impact on cheese. And we've been trying to recreate that magic ever since. And now we're able to make a cave that takes very little energy to adjust to the perfect temperature and humidity, whereas an above ground facility would take a little bit more energy to get it just where we wanted it. There'd be more fluctuation throughout the year. So this is a pretty static, steady, stable environment for these cheeses, and it really works. We're creating a habitat for these flora that's just right.
Awesome. Actually, one more. I gotta ask. Vermont represents. So many folks on right now are from Vermont, which is awesome. Robert from Vermont wants to know how much milk does it take to make a pound of cheese, or what's that look like? All that milk, creating this cheese product.
Yeah, it's about a 10% yield, depending, maybe a little higher, 12 or 15% for a high moisture cheese like these, where you're retaining more of the whey, less of it's getting evacuated. A lot of artisan cheesemakers keep some whey-fed pigs around at the edges of the pastures because it's quite nutritious the way that comes off. Also, a bigger company like Cabot would be able to process their waste whey, and they're able to capture the proteins out of the whey and use it in other products like a powder for your shakes, and then they can use the water that they pull the protein out of to wash their cheese plant. So all different kinds of producers have sort of different solutions for then how to use the whey. You can also put it on the fields to get some of those nutrients back into the pasture, kind of close the loop.
Very cool. Yeah, we had some questions about waste and cheese making, and thank you very much, for answering that. So, we're talking about, all that milk. Let's see where it comes from. Thank you so much, Zoe. We'll bring you back in just a few minutes. So we've seen the beginning stages of cheese making at Jasper Hill. So let's take a few steps back and see where the milk comes from. We're going to hear now from cropping manager Ellie Searles about the steps dairy farmers take to care for the land and animals, all while producing nutritious milk.
We are at Andersonville Farm in West Glover, Vermont. Here we milk around 220 Holsteins. In order to control the microbial volatility of raw milk in a way that ensures the safety and maximum quality for consumers, we feed exclusively dry hay, no fermented feed, so no silage, no corn silage, no haylage. First of all, the landscape in the rural communities, I think, are the most striking, defining qualities of this area. The cropping crew makes feed primarily for Andersonville Farm, and we hay about 950 acres in the towns of Craftsbury, Barton, Glover, Greensboro, and Hardwick. It's a volley between reacting to weather hours before or as it is occurring, and then also forecasting. It's a lot of forecasting. Maintaining herd numbers and maintaining quality standards. And then harvesting the grasses when, they're at peak quality and also, mentionable volume so that we're economically harvesting, high component feed. We're milking Holsteins because that's what was here when we came here, and we've only been trying to improve the herd genetics then. We've also been diversifying, breeding to other breeds. And then Jasper Hill had a small Asher dairy that was dissolved when COVID got really intense last year. And those milk cows were transitioned into this herd. So we are mixed in a way. And those Ashers are here for their different milk components. What is your travel distance? How far are you asking your animals to travel to work for their own feed? And here we're fortunate enough to have this big portion of land close to the farm. And another thing that works for us is we have plenty of acres to hay. We have plenty of acres to hay. And one of the nice things about grazing here at Andersonville is these groups can go out and harvest their own feed for the day, which is less work for the people mixing a total mixed ration for the dairy, and less diesel fuel expended, less amount of haying and tedding and raking and baling that we have to do here. We harvest the grasses at 30 to 35 days between cuttings, and they're properly fertilized and we have ample rain and sun. Then we're harvesting something that's got really meaningful protein and fat profile as far as being turned into cheese. You know, every gallon of milk has that much more cheese solids going towards a wheel. And we also store all of our hay in that big hay tent. So that hay tent probably fits, I don't know, 3,500, 4,000 bales. And then also we have a hay dryer. So there's 2 hay dryers with giant turbines and forced hot air. And then there's a hay cooler that just kind of draws air temperature air through the bales to delay fermentation before they can be dried in the dryer. So there are about 100 spots for 100 5-foot round bales. It's the only one in North America. I mean, they've been buying milk from 2 small dairy farms in Greensboro for a while, but they were always pasteurizing that milk for pasteurized cheese. But we're transitioning to start sourcing milk from small local community farms for raw milk and pasteurized milk, but we're trying to bring on many more local farms. The cropping crew is engaging in a multiple year plan to start measuring carbon, measuring species diversification, and also just general soil fertility so that we can compare improvements year to year headed forward. I work closely with a representative from Farm Compliance Services, and we have a nutrient management plan that we build together. Or he builds it and I execute it. And in that nutrient management plan, you know, that's a big binder that takes all of our 950 acres, all of the fertility we're generating at Andersonville, and basically proportionately distributes it in a way that is both reducing runoff and then also increasing fertility, and is part of our fertility improvement regime. We got a new cement manure pit 2 years ago, and that has revolutionized the way that we're fertilizing our land. And it also has reduced compaction in a way that now we're creating a fertility product that is pure and somewhat undiluted by water, just by the rainwater that falls into it. And so now as like a richer product, it's more meaningful to us. We milk 220 cows and we make this cheese, but we're also we are positively influencing and stewarding almost 1,000 acres amidst all these towns. You know, and that is meaningful. This is ag land that could be, you know, developed or used in a different way. Something that we do here on the ground in the cropping crew could manifest itself in the rind of some cheese that's been aging for months and months over in Greensboro. And that connectivity is something that we can't afford to forget.
So before we bring back Zoe, we have a couple of polling questions. We want to, you know, I think we have some pretty knowledgeable folks on, you know, looking at your questions, but let's do some polling. So which of the following farming practices help dairy farmers fight climate change? We have cover cropping, no-till farming, anaerobic digesters, and renewable energy, and all of the above.
Recording in progress.
All right, so y'all are very smart. So, you know, everything we eat has an impact. You know, every day dairy farmers like Jasper Hill, like dairy farmers throughout the United States and New England, impact the land, water, and air that we all share, but they are continuously innovating and adopting new practices and technologies to use fewer natural resources to feed our growing population. So highly recommend going to newenglanddairy.com to learn more about the U.S. dairy industry's 2050 goals. And, you know, they're becoming carbon neutral or better, optimizing water usage and improving water quality. So head to newenglanddairy.com. We have one more question for you. So when is dairy in season in New England? All right. So again, y'all are very smart, but dairy farmers, so they work 365 days a year to produce wholesome, nutritious dairy products like, the milk that you buy in the grocery store, that kids drink at school that come with their school meals, or the milk that goes into delicious cheese, like at Jasper Hill Farm. So, we live in, many folks live in New England on here, and that so many foods are difficult to grow and harvest during the winter months, but dairy is produced year round and is always fresh, local, and in season. It's such a cool food group. It's awesome. So when you buy dairy, you are supporting your local farmers in your region. So before we really get into tasting more cheese, I know it's I can't wait. It's staring at me. Let's look at your cheese boards. I'd love for Zoe to come up if she can see. We'll look at them all together. Y'all have been submitting some really cool cheese boards. Your setup is A+. Oh, I love it. Looks delicious. Nice. Are we doing it right, Zoe?
Oh, yeah. I don't see any wrong answers yet. Oh, it's so fun to see, take a peek and see where all the cheese is landing. I see it all queued up on the shelves and heading into the little boxes. So it's very gratifying to see it being enjoyed and plated up. Classic. We see a lot of grapes. That's a nice, bright, tangy way of cleaning the palate in between bites of rich cheese. Little charcuterie I see out there, some cured meat. Love it. Yep. Oh yeah, someone's figured out going in through the top.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for sharing. Keep doing it. If you want to show us your cheese, not too late. And we're going to share a link to the gallery so you can check it all out after the fact. But so Zoe, some questions came in about farming. So we actually had an awesome question from Sonia, 8 years old from Rhode Island. Does what a cow eat change the flavor of cheese?
Absolutely. Yes. We think very carefully about what the cows eat. And we not only are concerned about them having really high quality food, especially that beautiful grass that Ellie was telling us about that gets turned into dry hay for when they can't go outside in the wintertime. And so we're concerned with the components of the grass itself, the herbs and grasses that they're consuming do have an impact on the flavor and quality of the milk, but also the microbial profile. So dry hay is something that we take a lot of effort to make as opposed to fermented feed. Fermented hay is something that cows eat. It's easier to make in our wet climate, and it's really good for cows. It preserves nutrients, but the microbes of that fermented feed can conflict with the microbes that we're trying to cultivate for especially raw milk cheeses. So it's not only what the grass is made out of and what the cows are eating, but it's also the microbes surrounding whatever they're eating. So we think a lot about dairy nutrition. We also want to make sure they have the perfect balance of fat and protein and carbohydrates in their diet because they're putting forth a lot of energy to make milk for us.
Yeah, so actually, really cool thing too. A lot of dairy farmers actually, take food waste. So maybe it's, cranberries, from leftover from making cranberry juice or spent brewer's grain at a brewery, and actually can feed their cows, helping to reduce this food from entering landfills. So cool. We like to call cows the ultimate recyclers. And someone actually asked Dawn, do cows have a dietitian? I'm a registered dietitian for humans, but cows actually have, animal nutritionists that, take all these products and formulate an excellent diet that's, just, for the cow. My computer decided to go black. Can you still hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. So why don't you Awesome. So why don't you take folks, let's taste the next cheese. I'm going to reboot and I'll be right back.
Okay, so I think we should break the rules a little bit. I'm allowed to do that as the cheese expert in charge tonight. And we're going to skip straight to the cheddar because that's where I am. I am in one of our 2 cheddar vaults. So a bigger, taller space than the bloomy rind vault where I was before. And you can really get the sense for how deep underground that we are right now. We have 3 caves that are the same capacity with the same amount of shelves. A few thousand cheeses can fit in each one of these rooms. And what we're looking at here, all of these wheels were made by Cabot Creamery. So as I pointed out, the 2 racks of cheese that we make in a batch in our creamery, here a whole column of about 100 wheels would be made by Cabot Creamery. So they have much more sophisticated equipment that they're able to make bigger batches in. And this really changed our company, our partnership with Cabot. And it took us from that small farmhouse producer to the affineurs, which is the French word for cheese ripeners, with the caves that we're in today. So Cabot had seen all of the excitement around cave-aged artisan cheese. We chose to make cave-aged cheese, even though it was more work back in the day, because it's the way of getting the most value out of the milk. So why caves? Because you can grow this natural rind. Why the natural rind? Because that makes the most complex and tasty cheese, which is worth the most out in the market, which makes it possible to bring back as many resources into our rural community as we can. So Cabot was seeing all this excitement around artisan cheese in the turn of the millennium in the late 90s, early 2000s. And they saw their cheeses in a place that would have a cut to order cheese counter, but it would be maybe in the dairy case or the deli case, different category. So they wanted to participate in all of the chefs putting cheeses on the menu and the independent cheese shops popping up. So they reached out to the cheesemaking community in Vermont and said, does anyone want to grow a rind on cheese? We don't grow flora anywhere. That's not what we're trying to do. So they needed someone to do the dirty work of the cave aging. And Andy and Mateo, before they'd even sold their first pound of cheese, were like, we'll do that. We would love to make new friends in the cheese world. So they took a few 25 wheels, I think it was, took it into the cellar of their farmhouse. A year later, it was tasting great. And they found that because they were selling cheese directly to shops and restaurants, it was actually easier for them to find homes for that small amount of cheese than for the Cabot sales team, which had different relationships with different places in the market. So a co-branded cheese was born. We decided to keep going with this very delicious collaborative cheese, and Jasper Hill would be the ones to find homes for it in the market. And it won a big award its first year out there. It won Best of Show at the American Cheese Society, which is like winning the Super Bowl your first year as a team. And that allowed us to literally take it to the bank, get the investment that we needed to build this piece of infrastructure, with the idea that we had just seen how hard it was to be a FedEx-based business and sending small amounts of cheese all over the country, managing all those accounts. The first time that we were selling large wheels of cloth bound, we could build a pallet and work with a distributor and make one phone call instead of 20 to move that same amount of cheese. So by oversizing the size of the caves, we were able to make room for other cheesemakers. So right after the caves opened, we brought on 3 small farmstead producers as well as the Cabot cheeses. So Cabot has really been an important part of this story, and they've just been so generous in their support of this vision, and have been making beautiful cheeses for us to age and put forth alongside the ones that we make for our own cows ever since. So without further ado, let's try some Cabot cloth-bound cheddar. This is the award-winning cheese that brought home gold for us. So you'll notice a few things if you're familiar with Cabot cheeses. We love our New England sharp white cheddar. That's what we're known for. Wisconsin has their yellow cheddar. We have sharp white. This is a really different profile than our classic sharp white cheddar, right? So it's going to be sweeter. It's not going to have that same kind of bite. And it's going to have this like really interesting sort of crumbly texture, a little bit drier texture. And if you're lucky, you might get little crunchy crystals in there, little protein crystals that have formed during cheese ripening. And those are little parts of proteins that are the same. They find each other, they crystallize. It's called tyrosine. Sometimes some people think it's a salt crystal because that kind of has the same texture. And that's a sign of a well-aged cheese. And that's something that you don't see as often in a cheese that hasn't been cave aged. So the flavors here are very savory. They're a little caramely sweet. You have flavors of toasted nuts, maybe a little brown butter, chicken broth sometimes are flavors that we get in a cave aged cheddar. So a lot of complexity, and this happens fast. I mean, it's a long time to take care of a cheese for a year, but sometimes with the more typically aged cheddars, it can take 2, 4, 5 years to get a fully flavored cheese. So the warmer temperatures and the ability for the cheese to lose moisture gradually helps speed up that process and make these complex flavors a little bit more quickly.
So, question. So Suzanne from New Jersey, and I know you get this question a lot, this cheese is aging for months or, a year in this case. And then I bring it home and it gets moldy in my fridge. And then, so can you tell us a little bit about why that happens and the best way to store cheese?
Yes, we've tried really hard to get mold to grow on the cheese. I keep saying flora, because that's a softer term. But we're growing mold and yeast and bacteria on the surface of the cheese, and that's what's giving it its magic. So congratulations. If you get mold to grow on your cheese at home, you're an apreneur too. And it's the same cultures that we're growing here that are just trying to fill in the blanks of that cut surface of the cheese. So they're harmless. You can scrape them away and continue to enjoy your cheese. If you'd rather not go through that trouble, the best way of keeping it flora free on the cut surface would be to wrap it in tin foil. Actually is really good at slowing that process down, or even just parchment paper and then into a Tupperware container. The important part is not letting it dry out in the fridge. That's almost more important than avoiding those little spots that can be scraped away.
Could you freeze it? So someone has a very lucky problem. So Scott purchased a bunch of cave-aged cheddar. So it was on sale. So there's a lot of cheese. How fast does he need to eat it? How long will it last? Can they freeze it? Will that wreck it? Tell us, please.
All right. It's not like it's going to explode on a certain day. Like, it's going to keep doing its thing and aging in your fridge more slowly than it happens here, because that's a colder place. So there's no harm in keeping it around for a while, but it's not going to have that fresh complexity that a freshly cut wedge will. You can try freezing it, but we don't recommend it. It can mess with the textures. Harder cheeses will freeze a little bit better. Shredded cheese is usually totally fine. Soft cheese, we really don't recommend freezing it to keep it longer. So I would recommend making friends, maybe leaving a little treat on your neighbor's doorstep. Like, no one was ever mad at me for bringing too much cheese to a party.
Had a little party. Yeah. Or a safe party. So Joanne from New Hampshire, how do you know when it's ready? Cheese, you're not breaking in. Maybe you are. Tell us how do you know when it's ready?
Yeah, well, it's not when an alarm goes off, that's for sure. Let's see if we can find, here's a wheel that we've checked in on. We taste it. So we know from, knowing these cheeses batch to batch about when they should be ready. So we start tasting them earlier. So we take what looks like an apple core and we plunge it into the cheese, give it a turn, and then we can pull out a sample. And we taste that sample, and this wheel is our sacrificial wheel for the batch. So we're assuming that all of the wheels taste pretty much like this one. We're not going to end up selling this. So we can sort of go to town and take as many samples throughout the year as we want. And then when we notice that right balance of flavor and texture, then we'll put it in line for sales. And so we do that out of order. We don't go chronologically. Some batches are ready at 8 months, some need 14. And we have a trained staff of hardworking sensory professionals. Usually they do another job here too, but they are on a sensory panel and they'll check in on the cheeses and help us determine about when it can be predicted to be sold and where the best place for it to end up in the market is going to be.
So I know we have 3 more cheeses to taste, but we actually had a bunch of questions in the registration about how do you know what to pair with cheese? Can you tell, and what can you tell us about your sensory panel? I saved my harbison wrapper, and according to Jasper Hill, it's best served with barrel-aged wine and beer, a baguette and raspberry. So can you tell us how do you come up with those pairings?
It takes a lot of hard work. We do a lot of tasting. A lot of times when you're tasting a fermented food like cheese with a lot of complexity, when you taste it, sometimes it reminds you of something else. I mentioned toasted nuts and chicken broth. So those foods have aromatic compounds in common with the cheese, and every batch sort of expresses itself differently. So we sort of train our palates and our brains to free associate a little bit. Where have I tasted this aroma compound before? What is this really reminding me of? And chances are, if it reminds you of something, it might be a good match with that. We also try to do a little bit of, aromatic harmony matching, like as I just mentioned, but also balancing tastes. So if you have a hoppy, bitter beer, stay away from soft cheeses and blue cheeses, which can have a touch of bitterness. And you might not notice it in the cheese alone, but when you pair it with a bitter beer, all of a sudden it's just too much bitter going on. So if you have a hoppy beer, go towards a sweet, nutty cheddar like Claughton. Claughton is very pairing friendly because it has a lot of sweetness and almost no bitterness at all. So we kind of learn these little tricks and rules of thumb. But if you want to learn more, I would highly recommend finding a pairing class put on by a cheese professional or maybe a wine professional, whatever you're interested in. And that's the best way of learning, and tasting with friends. And you can't really go wrong, right? Maybe get 3 teas. You can do non-alcoholic pairings too, or 3 types of fruit or jam and 3 styles of cheese, and try them together. And you'll be surprised by how intuitively you notice when things clash or work really well together.
Awesome. Thank you. And so what's next in the tasting? What do we get to taste next?
Okay, since we're still in the hard cheese cave, I think we should try the Whitney. So this is a raw milk cheese that was made in those cool copper vats that Mateo was just pointing out to us. This one, I can definitely see some little crystals there. It's a nice sign. And the difference between the Whitney and the Claughton here, this is a younger cheese, and it's still pretty flavorful. And that happens because it's higher moisture. So it's somewhere in between the cheddar and the harbison, right? Harbison's very soft, high moisture. Claughton is kind of crumbly and dry. So this has kind of a supple texture, and it's a little bit more bendy. So the make doesn't produce as much acidity. We don't convert as much lactose to lactic acid. And we end up with more calcium. When you make a more acidic cheese, you're actually dissolving away some of the calcium. That gives a cheese a bendy texture. So this is what we call a sweeter make that's retained more minerals and has that sort of elastic bend to it. So it's on a firm cheese spectrum. You can kind of go from crumbly to bendy. This is definitely considered bendy, and bendy sort of semi-firm cheeses are the best for melting. So this cheese was designed for putting on your Reuben sandwich or in your grilled cheese or over your French onion soup. That's like where in the world this cheese comes from, is French onion soup, where French onion soup was invented. Very velvety and silky on the palate. Really has some sweet fruitiness to it as well. And then like maybe a little pineapple note, and then more like cashew butter flavors, maybe some hazelnuts. So it's really fun to taste through these different styles and get a feel for the different textures and flavors that can be developed. This cheese is a raw milk cheese. Oh, yep, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask, so this is one of your newest cheeses, correct?
I'm still getting to know it myself. Every time I try a piece, it's like really a new experience, and I'm still getting to know the different ways the cheese expresses itself. But I've been very impressed with our cheesemakers. It can take a long time to develop a recipe that ages 3 to 6 months. You know, you make a change, you've really got to patiently wait to see how that manifests before you go and mess with the next variable. So our team has some years under their belts, and they've really developed this cheese pretty quickly to a consistently delicious place, even though every batch is a little bit different.
It is delicious. So I know we have a couple more cheeses to hit, but there's been some questions about technology, about, you know, how you care for those large format cheeses. So we actually have an awesome video, and I know you're moving to the blue cheese cave. You are underground, connection's a little spotty, so we're going to play this video here. So what you're about to see is a super cool piece of technology. It's actually a robot that has the ability to wash cheeses with a brine, brush and vacuum developing cheddars. which have natural rinds that slough off and need brushing or vacuuming during their first year of ripening. So, prior to having the robot, Jasper Hill actually had to use people power to care for these large format cheeses. And, they're in northern Vermont, low population area. There just weren't enough humans physically suited to keep up with this work. I mean, there are so many wheels of cheese there. And, I believe they're 40 pounds, some of the cave-aged cheddar. So there weren't enough humans to keep up with the cheese needs. So when the robot arrived, they found that the cheese quality actually improved, as did the quality of work lives of their staff. Staff could now shift hours away from physically difficult labor and instead spend more time working on understanding and improving the cheeses. So participating in the cheese making process, like we just talked about, attending all sensory evaluations and recipe development. And they found that staff numbers have only increased since introducing the robot, which is really cool. So, and this is just one example of technology on dairy farms, at cheesemakers. Farming practices they continue to adapt and grow to keep up with our growing global population. We have drones on farms to check in crops and monitor cows, methane digesters to recycle cow manure into renewable energy. You see robotic milkers, you see cow Fitbits, and so much more. So really, if you're interested in technology, highly suggest checking out our Farm Life page at newenglanddairy.com. So Zoe, are you back?
Can you hear me? I'm back.
I can hear you.
Okay, so we made a quick pit stop in the wash rind vault. So these cheeses are a lot like our bloomy rinds. They're soft and small, and they have this pudgy texture. So we're going to taste Willoughby in here, where it's in its natural habitat, this gooey, pudgy wash rind cheese. So a lot like the brie family, the bloomy rinds, what's growing on the surface of the cheese is actively softening it. My Willoughby does have a little bit of white flora, but most of what's here are what are called wash rind cultures. So we're literally washing the surface of this cheese with a brine instead of letting the flora bloom and grow. We're sort of beating back the flora with the salty brine, and that's creating a totally different ecosystem. We're selecting for a different group of microbes. So instead of those mushroomy, garlicky flavors, we tend to get apricots, cured meats, peaches and cream. It's funky and a little bit more of that stinky cheese flavor. But again, bark is worse than the bite. It might smell very aromatic and then is much more balanced on the palate. So this Willoughby is known as being an approachable entree to the stinky cheese family, where we think of Limburger and Epoisse. So enjoy this, especially with apricot preserves or anything like peach flavored kombucha or something like that. You're going to get a lot of interesting flavor combinations. All right, and then we can pop right over. We'll see if we can keep connection. If not, Hillary, maybe you can field the question.
Yeah. So I actually have a question, a nutrition related question, which I'm very excited about. So Mary from Rhode Island wants to know, why do some cheeses bother my son's stomach and some don't? He can only drink lactose-free milk. So we want to, we were just in the hard cheese vault, hard cheeses. So you want to look for our harder cheeses like cheddar, Parmesan, Colby, Swiss. So when cheese is made, when Matteo walked us through the creamery, the curd is physically separated from the whey. And the whey is where most of that lactose is found. So, and then minimal lactose left in the curd actually breaks down considerably as the cheese ages. So you want to look for those harder, more aged cheeses. So, but you can also try pairing the cheese with other foods, so like crackers or bread, to give your body more time to digest the lactose. So thank you so much, Mary, for that nutrition question. So I believe, where are we, Zoe? Because this is quite different, very exciting.
Yeah, so we're in the blue cheese cave, and we can see all of this amazing flora growing on the outside of these wheels. They're pretty young because we took a break in the creamery as we were finishing construction. And so we don't have any fully finished cheeses that would be maybe 75 days old. These are all in their sort of awkward, fuzzy teenage phase. But I do have a finished wedge here that we can see. So on the inside of these developing wheels, there's air pockets. And we've actually spiked the cheese with a stainless steel spike to let air in, because we've put blue mold spores in the milk during the cheese make. But if we didn't give them air to breathe, they would never bloom and grow and give the cheese flavor and break down its texture. And we've done it on accident before. We've missed a wheel in spiking, and you cut it open when it should be ripe, and it's white and salty and bland and kind of acidic, and just it doesn't have that velvety texture and that warm spice flavor. This should taste like a little bit like licorice. Some blue cheeses are really bold and in your face, and this is a little bit, it's fully flavored but quite balanced. So the spice notes are an accent more than the main event. It's primarily like buttery and cheesy. Yeah.
So can you talk about, so Stacy asked, you know, is there any concern with cross-contamination with the different cheeses, different floras being in the same cave? But also let's talk about, we've been in different caves, different floras. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So when we open the caves, there's more air coming in than going out. And so when we open a cave door, air rushes out instead of kind of getting sucked in. It's called positive pressure. That's one way that we can kind of keep control. We also, I've been sanitizing my hands in between and walking through a foot bath, just to help, you know, keep those things as clean and separate as possible. But there's only so much that we can do. And we see that if we make the cheese on target, if it has the right temperature and that if the finished curd has the right moisture and salt and acidity, and we've inoculated it in the right ways, we've pointed in the right direction, it's going to grow what it's supposed to grow. And if we make a mistake and the pathway goes awry, then it sort of grows unexpected things that maybe should be on a different cheese. So these are quite resilient. There are certain cheeses that we don't make, like Vermont Creamery makes beautiful, lightly aged, wrinkly, rinded goat cheeses. Those are very delicate and more susceptible to rogue blue molds. But while you'll see some blue mold on the bark of your harbison, it won't grow on the rind, because what's growing on the surface of that cheese is so robust and bossy, it sort of outcompetes anybody else.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we're actually, I believe Mateo is here with us, which is really exciting. See if
there he is in his new creamery.
Welcome.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, it's so great to be here with you.
Thank you. So Joseph from New York has a question for you, Mateo. Can you tell us where you learned to make cheese?
Oh, so I went to work at Neal's Yard Dairy, which is an incredible business in the center of London. They select and mature about 75 varieties of British farmhouse, British and Irish farmhouse cheeses. And I worked for them for a while after we purchased the farm, and we had decided to make cheese. And over the course of about 18 months, I went to work for some of their suppliers. But like the real answer to that question is, I learned how to make cheese by making cheese every day for like the last 15 years. So practice makes perfect, but I like cheese making is something that you may never like really reach perfection on. You can just reach for it. And but I guess it would be England.
All right, awesome. So do you have advice for home cheese makers? Folks are wondering, how do you learn how to make cheese? Learn more about cheese. What do you recommend?
Be prepared for a tremendous mess. And, you know, getting back to that idea of how do you learn how to make cheese, you have to do it often, right? And I consider cheese making as being an exercise in consciousness over time, because cheese making is 100% about managing 1,000 details over like an extended period of time. You have to be able to like both remember, and so that's basically like record keeping. You need to be able to like manage like sanitation and make sure things are clean. And you need to be able to like really connect the sensory results with like that thing that you did 2 weeks ago, 4 months ago, 2 years ago, in a way that will allow you to get better as you go.
So there's been a couple of more technical cheese making questions, and I saved them just for you. So Alex, you know, you're resting on that copper tank. So what's the advantage of copper over stainless steel? And then Raymond we have South Africa here, which is very exciting. The benefits of maturing different types of cheese. So why do they age on the timber or on, you know, on the racks? Can you talk about?
All right. Yeah, absolutely. So for Alpine style cheeses, you know, this is very traditional. So this actual like cheese vat we purchased used, it may be like 40 or 50 years old. And it was pressed out of a solid sheet of copper. It's pretty incredible, the technology that went into making this. But it was actually the Celts who developed the metallurgical skills to make these Alpine style cheeses. And you need this like conductivity, right? So Alpine cheeses are heated, and the conductivity of the copper really helps in that sense. But copper is actually antimicrobial as well. And so in a world that predated sanitizer, you could use copper in order to like really keep the integrity, the microbial integrity of your cheese making equipment. In terms of like wood, it's a really interesting substrate for ripening cheese. If you think about what happens in anaerobic conditions, and those anaerobic conditions might be when you have a cheese on like a piece of stainless steel or a piece of plastic, you have this like anaerobic condition, and generally bad things happen in anaerobic conditions. So wood actually acts as a sponge. It absorbs moisture, and if the conditions are too dry, it actually wicks moisture back towards the cheese, and that way it modulates moisture in the environment and in the cheese in a way that really helps the maturation of natural rinded cheeses. There's been a lot of questions about like the sanitary nature of wood, and over the years there's been big like political controversy about whether wood could or should be used for ripening cheese. And the reality is that there's nothing that can replace the technical capacity of wood to really ripen a cheese well. There's millions and millions and millions of pounds of cheese that are ripened on wood, Parmigiano Reggiano, Gruyere, and in this country, there's all kinds of cheese that's ripened on wood. I think when the FDA tried to like ban the ripening of cheese on wood in 2014, they didn't recognize that there's like 30 million pounds of cheese that are aging on wood in Wisconsin, right? And this is like, here we are. Cheese ripened on wood. I think we have a saying for that that we developed in 2014. Hashtag wood is good.
I love it. Love it. Use that hashtag and you post some photos tonight. So Nicole from Vermont, excuse me. So they would like to know what the difference between your process for making cheese and say a French process for a similar cheese.
So at the end of the day, there are cheese technologies that have evolved in different parts of the world over millennia. We haven't invented anything new. In that sense, there's nothing new under the sun. What we have here and what our innovation is really about connecting our farming system to the products that we produce using these like age-old primordial technologies, right? So as a species, and in some ways, the track of human civilization can be linked by developments in cheese technology. It's pretty amazing. Human history and the evolution of cheese are there. There is this amazing history. You should check out Paul Kinstead's book, Cheese and Culture. He's a dairy scientist at University of Vermont, has done some incredible work tracing that history, and that's where I got this, like, the little Celtic technology and metallurgy information from. But we're not doing anything that's radically different than what's happening in France. What we are doing is producing milk on this landscape, and this landscape produces something that is inherently different than what's happening, in the Alps or the Jura or anywhere or anywhere else in the world. And in essence, that's what we have to offer the world, is this taste of place.
Thank you. So can you tell us a little bit about, recipe making? What's inspired? So we've had some questions come in, actually. Sherry Gray seems to be a fan favorite over here. And can you tell us kind of what goes into, how is that cheese developed? Get us in the brain.
So I always say that, cheese is a discovery, not an invention, right? We kind of back into our understanding of how to make a cheese. A lot of the cheeses that we make are happy accidents. Sherry Gray, on the other hand, was something that was actually very intentional. And it is based on a very simple proposition, and that is that is good. And in my experience, that's been almost universally true. So we take milk and we add this beautiful cream to it, and 1 + 1 is 3. Generally, we've been focused on something that's much more austere in an approach. And if you look at most of the rest of our collection, particularly our raw milk cheeses, or a cheese like harbison even, which really evolved through these happy accidents. And that's what I mean when you when I say you back into your understanding of how cheese works. Cheese is amazing. You've got 4 ingredients: milk, cultures, microbes, rennet, which is an enzyme, and salt. And those 4 ingredients can produce 1,000 iterations on a theme. And so, what we're really doing is using microbiology to manipulate chemistry in order to create different flavor and textural experiences. And it's so complicated. It's one of the things I really love about cheese making, is there's just this rabbit hole of science and, the application, the operationalizing of ideas that cause you to, I'm on a path of lifelong learning. So just an amateur here, really.
So, and I don't think anyone thinks that on this at this event. What was, so Kirsten and a few other folks, what was the first cheese you produced at Jasper Hill?
So when we started this business, we were milking 1 cow, then 2, then 3, then 4, because when we started the business, we bought 15 open heifers from farmers in the area, and we bred them. And during their gestation, we built this creamery, which, you know, we're looking at this new part of the building that we just built, but like behind me here, you know, we had 1,500 square feet on 2 floors. We made all of our cheese in this space, and we ripened it like downstairs. And the first cheese that we made, we needed to like figure out how to make cheese from the milk of 1 cow, right? Because we had like a fancy, well, it wasn't fancy, it was like a Gouda vat that we had purchased from a Dutch farmer in Holland and shipped over here. And we weren't making enough milk to even touch the paddle. And so we had a bucket of milk, and we had to figure out how to make cheese, a cheese we never intended to make, which was this lactic cheese called Constant Bliss. And Constant Bliss was a raw milk, hand ladled, little truckle. It was mold ripened, and it really caught the world off guard, I would say, at the moment. Here's this like farmstead cheese from Vermont. It was like reminiscent of something like that was very esoteric, raw milk from you know, people hadn't seen anything like this before, and it was fantastic. We don't make Constant Bliss anymore because of the sheer labor required. And you know, at one point we were hand ladling milk from 31, 32 5-gallon pails, and I basically ruined my wrists and shoulders. But that was the origin cheese at Jasper Hill.
Well, you have some fans. Folks are coming in and say, "Oh, Constant Bliss, how we loved you." So bring it back. Thank you. So question for both Matteo and Zoe, favorite cheese? It might be a tough one to answer, but
our cheese or others cheese?
To both. Why not?
All right, I'll start. And I might be like I'm going to start with like my favorite others cheese, and that may be Colston Bassett Stilton. That cheese is just like a showstopper. If you haven't had Colston Bassett Stilton, because there's Stilton, and then there's Colston Bassett Stilton, and then there's like Colston Bassett Stilton that's selected by Neal's Yard Dairy. It's just one of the most like delicious things I've ever put in my mouth. Lately, what I've been just like housing is Whitney. Whitney is a Whitney is a cheese that we developed over the last like year. It's like a Alpine style melting cheese. It ages out really well. I don't know. I love that cheese. I'm really excited about what's happening and where that cheese is going and where it's taking our business over the next few years.
Yeah, folks actually were able to taste Whitney. It's part of the collection tonight. So I'm sure you grew your fan base tonight. So Zoe, what about you?
My favorite cheese can be eaten with a spoon. And so in our collection, that's harbison, right? Scoop it right out of the top, or Winnemere during Winnemere season, very special time of year. And then in terms of what other people make, there are what are called thistle renneted sheep's milk cheeses from Portugal and Spain. Amontillado is kind of a generic term for that style. La Serena, yeah. Tortas is another word that you'll see associated with them, but they're usually these like pudgy, medium to small size wheels that are very gooey and really funky and animally and fruity and complex and weird. So, and they're hard to find. So keep an eye out. And whenever I see one, I snatch it up and have a moment.
So, we're going to be following up with all the attendees, and we'll include your recommendations. We'll include the book that Matteo mentioned, include all these resources in case you're not fast and furious with handwriting right now. So, we're nearing the end of the night. So love, kind of folks who want to learn more about cheese, maybe they want to become a cheese taster. Maybe they just want to know more. What are your recommendations for them? Maybe they want to do what you do, Zoe.
Get thee to a cheesemonger, I say. Find somebody in your community who works with cheese. Cheesemonger is the term for the profession of someone who works behind a cheese counter, or maybe a restaurant that serves cheese, who can hand you a sample and talk about what you're tasting together. That's the best way to learn about cheese, I think. And if you're really ambitious and you want to end up in my shoes, I started working behind a cheese counter. Grew up, I didn't know anything about cheese, and I learned by tasting along with my customers.
And so questions also came in. Where can folks find Jasper Hill cheese? Do you sell outside of Vermont? That was one of the questions that came in.
Yeah, as Matteo mentioned, we're really trying to get our high value products into places where people are eating this kind of cheese, which usually beyond our backyard, where we have tons of supporters, will be bigger cities where there are more specialty shops and fancy grocery stores where there's the meat counter and the cheese counter and all of that. So I would say where fine cheese is sold, if you start to look for that bright blue label, you'll see Jasper Hill cheeses around. If you're in a less populated area without that kind of specialty scene, you can try the internet. There's great places to order cheese online, including our web store, and also partners of ours out there, independent cheese shops that ship by mail.
And so again, 2 minutes left. We are nearing the end. I feel like we could ask you questions all night long. You both are amazing to talk to. Any just parting words for our cheese lovers? Matteo, I'll let you go first.
I would just say that cheese really is our collective memory. I think it's deep in our DNA, and it's an opportunity to connect to something that's truly authentic and real. I don't know if there's anything more real than a farmstead cheese made from milk that's grazed from a grazed herd of cows. And behind every farmstead cheese is an incredible human, family, or team of just this incredible effort. There's no artisan cheesemaker that's in this for the money. We're all in this for something, just trying to lay a hold of something that's truly meaningful. In a way, when I describe what the work that we do, it's really about connecting the consumer and the consuming public to something that's real. And I think you'll find that in just about every farmstead cheese you're going to try. So seek them out. We are everywhere.
Thank you. No, that was beautiful. Carmen says, I love that cheese is a collective memory. Beautiful. And Zoe, to say farewell to you. Any parting words for our hundreds of folks on?
Just thank you so much for tuning in and listening to our story, and for supporting our dream and our shared mission of connecting people with real food that we have with other artisan cheesemakers. So if you see an American cheese with a natural rind and you pick it up, even if it's not ours, we thank you.
Thank you both so much. So thank you, Matteo and Zoe, and thanks to everyone for tuning in tonight. This was really a blast. We're so excited that we were able to do this with you. So just a couple of reminders. You will get an email, hopefully tomorrow, wake up out of my cheese coma and compose that. But that will have our evaluation in it. And again, your feedback helps us create amazing events like this one. And again, check your email next week, winners of the cheese contest, and follow us on social. Follow New England Dairy, follow Jasper Hill, check out their new cheese that they're making, learn more about dairy farming in New England. Thank you all and have a great night.